I'm back. Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at 12.3, the triumph of Parliament in England. As we move forward today, we're going to take a look at the Tudor monarchy, which is the lead family in England, how it gets along with Parliament, the legislative body in Great Britain. We're going to analyze the clashes between the Stuarts and Parliament, another dynastical or ruling family in England. We'll see how Parliament ushered in a century of revolution and change. We'll understand how the English Civil War and the development of Commonwealth led to the Glorious Revolution, and we'll explain the development of the English constitutional government. Okay, once again, feel free to pause if need be at any point in time. You should be filling out your responses to the focus questions and then submitting the final responses in Google Classroom. I do suggest you use a secondary device, one to watch the recorded lesson, while at the same point in time having your Chromebook open to get down all the information that you need. So we look at the Tudor dynasty, ruled in England from 1485 to 1603. So basically 128-year reign or rule in England, pretty good run for anyone. When you look at Henry VIII, why did he work with Parliament? He needed to coordinate the changeover from Catholicism to the Church of England. If you remember the old story we had looked at previously, he flip-flop-swapped and changed the entire religion of a country so that he could get an annulment and get married again. He didn't want to get a divorce because that would create him as a sinner within the church. The Pope refused to give him an annulment, and so he basically changed the entire Church of England to the entire church from Catholicism to the Church of England, Protestant form of Christianity. Henry got Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, making Henry the head of the Protestant Church of England. Henry went to the Parliament for money as well and support. Had Elizabeth I handle her relationship with Parliament as we kind of bounce around between different leaders in Great Britain. Why do you think this was the case? Cite some evidence. Elizabeth I did not appear before Parliament. The text told us that her advisors conveyed the Queen's wishes to the Parliament and forbade discussion of certain subjects. Not appearing in person and operating through her advisors, she could keep a level of control over her interactions and issue orders without confrontation. So basically, she could operate outside the scope of Parliament because she was not really meeting with them. Her skillful handling of Parliament led to her being nicknamed Good Queen Bess, Bess being a nickname for Elizabeth, and she was a very popular and successful ruler. However, she died in 1603, and we're going to see a little, infighting for control in England. Because she was not married and did not have a direct heir, the throne then passed to her relatives, the Stuarts of Scotland. The Stuarts dealt with a century of revolution as they kind of fought back and forth to see who should control England. This is kind of the family tree here. We mentioned Henry VIII. She was originally married to Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, Arthur Tudor, Jane Seymour. I'm not going to read through them all, but here's Elizabeth I, who we referenced. Also had Edward, who was King Henry VIII's only son. He lived a very short life, unfortunately. And we have here the Tudors fighting with the Stuarts for control. We have the Stuart family tree. Just shrunk that a little bit so we can still see anything you might have needed from 3 or 4. 5, how is James I similar to and different from Elizabeth I? Well, James I and Elizabeth I were both monarchs of England. They both dealt with Parliament, but Elizabeth I, we mentioned before, was more skillful. James I was a little bit more boisterous, a little bit more demanding, saying he had the divine right to be king. Why did Parliament react negatively to James I's speech about divine right? Well, the Parliament is kind of what we would call a power struggle. Nobody wants to give up power anywhere in government, anywhere within society. As a result, they saw James I as a threat to their power. Who were the Puritans? These were English citizens who sought to purify the Church of England. How are the Long Parliament and the imposition of the Anglican prayer book connected? Well, the imposition of the Anglican prayer book sparked a Scottish revolt. To put down the revolt, James I had to summon Parliament, which became the Long Parliament when it began its own revolt. This is moving us closer to the English Civil War. How long did the English Civil War last? 1642 to 1651, quite a bit longer than the American Civil War. Some of the events of the English Civil War: Henry VIII rules where Parliament gets used to being consulted. Elizabeth I worked with Parliament, but forbids discussion of foreign policy and marriage. James I was in direct clash with Parliament. Charles I summons Parliament to help him raise taxes. Parliament forces Charles I to sign the Petition of Right, so Charles I dissolves Parliament and ignores the Petition of Right. So basically, he didn't get his way, so he basically dissolved Parliament, which is quite a dramatic event. Parliament forces Scots rebel. Charles I summons Parliament to help him raise funds to put down the Scottish Rebellion. The Long Parliament struggles for power with Charles I, so he tries to arrest radical leaders of the House of Commons. Radical leaders form their own army, and the Civil War begins, basically between members of Parliament versus the king. We'll have the two sides in the English Civil War next. The Cavaliers. These were the supporters of Charles I. They were wealthy nobility, well-trained in dueling and warfare. And then the Roundheads, which were the supporters of Parliament, composed of the country gentry, town-dwelling manufacturers, and the Puritan clergy. So kind of an eclectic group there. Ultimately, the Roundheads win. They were tough fighters, skilled. Oliver Cromwell, who led them, was a skilled general, some considered a genius. Now, Charles I, because he was on the losing side, not only did he lose the war, the Civil War, not only did he lose the crown, he also lost the head in which the crown had sat on, as he was beheaded in January 1649. Why do European monarchs respond as they did to the death of Charles I? Well, they were shocked, threatened by the idea that kings could be whisked out and removed by the power of the people and through the courts. They too probably were getting some pains in their neck, kind of being a little bit fearful that they might be next. Cromwell and the Commonwealth. What happened in Ireland during the Commonwealth period? Supporters of Charles II attacked England from Ireland. In response, Cromwell conquered Ireland and forced the Irish Catholics to move to the western part of the island. Looking at 17, James I, he believes some people, like kings, are closer to God. Lavlar equates the richest and the poorest because they both share the same most basic truth: they are alive. Described the Glorious Revolution. James II was openly practicing Catholic. He abolished laws without warning. He appointed Catholics to high positions. He was very much prejudiced in favor of Catholics. He appointed Catholics to high positions. Protestants in Parliament were alarmed, fearing the restoration of the Roman Catholic Church. They asked William and Mary to rule England instead, and James II was forced to flee. What was the English Bill of Rights? What was the impact? The English Bill of Rights was a document signed by William and Mary. It gave Parliament control over spending and reinstated the traditional rights of English citizens. Its impact is that it established the fact that Parliament was superior over the monarchy, that the monarchy had to answer to the Parliament. 20, England's constitutional government. Describe the differences between the Tories and the Whigs, kind of like the Democrats and Republicans in the United States. Tories were usually the aristocrats who supported tradition and the Anglican Church, more like Republicans. Whigs supported the Parliament, usually urban business people, believed in religious tolerance. What was the makeup of George I's cabinet? Well, first of all, a cabinet is a team of advisors. They advised him in Parliament. They helped George I and later on George II set policy. Today we have a cabinet in the United States for the president. These are positions that help the president or leader to govern in broad areas like the Secretary of the Treasury or Secretary of Defense, things like that. And the final reflection question here, how did England become a much more modern nation as a result of the Glorious Revolution? While the English Bill of Rights established that all citizens have natural rights and freedoms, the social contract that we saw with the Enlightenment between the government and the people, political parties gained power and influence, and they created a brand new position, which is probably the most powerful position in Great Britain today, the Prime Minister position, the true leader in the country. The monarchy in England today is more figurehead, not very powerful today. So that pretty much wraps up our discussion on this particular topic. Until next time, Mr. Clark is out.